My name is Tom, and I bought my first house in Manchester last year. I sold it 6 months later and took a massive loss. I've never told anyone why. The house was a 3-bedroom semi-detached in a quiet street. Nothing fancy, but perfect for a first-time buyer. The price was lower than similar houses in the area, but the estate agent said the previous owner just wanted a quick sale after a divorce. Made sense to me. I moved in during March and spent the first few weeks decorating, getting the place how I wanted it. The neighbours were friendly enough, kept to themselves mostly. Everything seemed normal. About a month after I'd moved in, I was putting some boxes in the loft when I noticed something odd. There was a section of the floor that looked newer than the rest, like someone had recently replaced the boards. I pulled up one of the boards to have a look, thinking maybe there'd been a leak or something. Underneath was a plastic bag, sealed up tight. Inside the bag were several mobile phones, maybe 6 or 7 of them, all different models. There was also a handful of bank cards with different names on them, and a small notebook with addresses written in it. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just random stuff left behind. Someone had deliberately hidden this. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it and went downstairs. I didn't know what to do. Should I call the police? Should I just ignore it? I decided to sleep on it and figure it out in the morning. That night, around 2 in the morning, I heard someone trying my back door. Not knocking, just quietly testing the handle, trying to open it. I'd locked it before bed, but I could hear someone jiggling the handle, trying to force it. I grabbed my phone and crept downstairs. Through the kitchen window, I could see a figure in my back garden, standing by the door. They were wearing dark clothes and a hood, and they were trying to pry the door open with something. I called the police immediately and stayed upstairs while I waited for them to arrive. By the time they got there, about 8 minutes later, the person was gone. The officers checked the garden and found marks on the door frame where someone had tried to force it open, but whoever it was had disappeared. I told the police about what I'd found in the loft. They went up and bagged everything as evidence. They said the phones and cards were likely stolen and asked me questions about the previous owner. I told them I'd never met him, only dealt with the estate agent. The police said they'd investigate and told me to keep my doors and windows locked. They increased patrols in the area for the next few nights. 2 days later, it happened again. This time around midnight, I heard someone walking around my back garden. I looked out the bedroom window and saw 2 people this time, both wearing dark clothes, both checking the windows and doors. One of them was trying the shed at the bottom of the garden. I called the police again. By the time they arrived, the people were gone, but they'd forced open my shed and gone through everything in there. The police told me this was more serious than they'd first thought. They said the previous owner might have been involved in criminal activity and that whoever was breaking in was probably looking for something specific. They advised me to install cameras and a proper alarm system. I did all that, spent nearly £1,000 on security. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every noise at night made me jump. I'd lie awake listening for footsteps in the garden, for someone trying the doors. Then one evening, I got home from work and found my back door had been smashed in. Someone had broken in during the day while I was at work. They'd torn the house apart, drawers emptied, furniture moved, even floorboards pulled up in some of the rooms. They'd clearly been searching for something. Nothing of mine was stolen. Whoever broke in was only interested in finding whatever the previous owner had left behind. I called the police again, and they sent forensics to check for evidence. They told me they'd been investigating the previous owner, and he was wanted in connection with a series of burglaries and credit card fraud. Apparently, he'd skipped town before they could arrest him, and the house had been repossessed by the bank and sold quickly. The police thought his associates were looking for stolen goods or money he might have hidden in the house before he left. I couldn't live there after that. I put the house back on the market after a month. Had to be honest about what had happened, which meant I got way less than I'd paid for it. Took a £15,000 loss just to get out of there. The estate agent said the break-ins would put off buyers, that I should wait a few months and let things calm down. But I didn't care. I just wanted rid of it. I learned an expensive lesson about houses that are too cheap and sales that are too quick. There's always a reason, and sometimes that reason can ruin your life. My name is Daniel, and I moved into a new house in Leeds about a year ago. The house was a 3-bedroom terrace in a working-class area. I just started a new job and needed somewhere close to the office. The landlord seemed sound, a bloke in his 40s who owned a few properties around the city. I moved in during January and everything seemed normal at first. Quiet street, neighbours kept to themselves, no issues. The house was furnished, which was perfect since I didn't have much stuff of my own. About 6 weeks after I'd moved in, I was working from home one afternoon when I heard a key in the front door. I thought maybe the landlord had come round to check something and forgotten to tell me. But when I went to the hallway, there was a woman standing there, probably in her 30s, holding shopping bags. She looked as shocked as I was. We both just stood there staring at each other for a second. Then she said, "Who are you? What are you doing in my house?" I told her I lived here, that I'd been renting for over a month. She went pale and said this was her house. She'd been living here for 3 years. She showed me her driving license with this address on it. My stomach dropped. I showed her my tenancy agreement, the keys the landlord had given me, the deposit receipt. She pulled out her phone and called someone, and I heard her say, "There's a man in the house. He says he's renting it." It turned out she'd been living there until December. She'd gone back to Poland for Christmas to see her family and had been there for about 6 weeks sorting out a sick relative. She'd paid her rent in advance before leaving and had told the landlord she'd be back at the end of January. While she was away, the landlord had changed the locks, removed all her belongings, and rented the place to me. He'd kept her deposit and the advance rent she'd paid. He'd basically stolen her home and everything in it while she was out of the country. When she came back a week earlier than she'd told him, she'd been staying with a friend while trying to contact the landlord to get her key. He'd been ignoring her calls. She'd finally decided to come round with her old key to see if it still worked, and that's when she found me living there. We both called the landlord. He didn't answer my calls, but he answered hers. I could hear him on speakerphone telling her the tenancy had ended, that he'd sent her messages about it, that her stuff was in storage. All lies. She'd never received any messages, and he'd never contacted her about ending the tenancy. We called the police together. When they arrived and heard the whole story, they said this was a civil matter and we'd need to sort it through the courts. But they also said what the landlord had done was likely illegal eviction and theft. The woman, her name was Cassia, was in tears. All her belongings were gone. Photos of her family, her grandmother's jewellery, her clothes, her laptop with years of work on it. Everything. The landlord had cleared it all out and either sold it or dumped it. I felt sick. I'd paid this man £800 deposit and a month's rent in advance. I'd been sleeping in someone else's bed, using someone else's furniture, while she'd been desperately trying to get back into her own home. I told Cassia I'd move out immediately, that I hadn't known any of this, but she said it wasn't my fault, that I was a victim too. She said the landlord had done this before, that she'd found complaints online from other tenants who'd had similar problems. Over the next week, we both tried to get our money back from the landlord. He'd disappeared. His phone was disconnected, the address he'd given me turned out to be fake, and the letting agent who'd arranged my viewing said they'd only met him once and had transferred the fees to a bank account. The police got involved properly when we showed them evidence that he'd been scamming multiple people. Turned out Mark Patterson wasn't even his real name. He'd been renting out properties he didn't own, taking deposits and rent from multiple people for the same places, then disappearing before anyone caught on. Cassia took him to court for illegal eviction and theft. I joined the case trying to get my deposit back. We found 4 other people he'd scammed the same way, taken their money, rented out properties he didn't own or had no right to rent out, then vanished. The case took nearly 8 months. In the end, Cassia won and was awarded £8,000 in damages, but the landlord never paid it. He'd declared bankruptcy under a different name and had left the country. We never got our money back. I'm still living in the same house, but Cassia found the actual owner, and now I rent directly from him. He had no idea his property had been illegally let out. He'd hired Mark as a property manager and had been getting monthly payments, not realizing Mark was charging tenants way more than he was passing on. The whole thing taught me to be more careful about who I rent from.